From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Dermatology Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Dermatology.
Hello and welcome to our listeners around the world. You're listening to JAMA Dermatology Author Interviews. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Adamson, the web editor for JAMA Dermatology and host of this podcast episode. Medical publishing is an important aspect of academic medicine. Whether you're a medical student working on your first manuscript, a resident aiming to boost your academic footprint, or even a seasoned attending, this episode is for you. In a newly published editorial in JAMA Dermatology, two editors, including the editor-in-chief, break down what to consider when trying to publish your work in a high-impact journal, how to design your study with publication in mind, how to craft a compelling manuscript, and what to expect during the peer review process. Dr. Andrea Maderal is a board-certified dermatologist and associate professor in the Dr. Philip Frost Department of Dermatology and Cutaneous Surgery at Miller School of Medicine at the University of Miami in Florida. She's here to discuss this editorial. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Maderal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adamson, for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you on. So for those of you that might not know Dr. Maderal, do you mind introducing yourself in terms of like what you do, like what your special interest is in dermatology, and perhaps tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the editing process yourself?
Absolutely. So I focus on anything that I put into the category of medical dermatology at the University of Miami. I love treating our patients with complex diseases, so I'm the director of our autoimmune connective tissue disease clinic. I run inpatient consults at our county hospital, and I run our leprosy clinic at Jackson Memorial Hospital. So anything complex, I love. So naturally, for me, being in academia makes a lot of sense. If you want to see these interesting patients, it's a good place to work to be able to see the different pathologies and complexities that I love. And part of my academic journey was trying to figure out what areas of medicine I really wanted to explore further, what things I could do that interested me, but also helped me with career development. And that's when I came across the opportunity to be an editorial fellow for JAMA Dermatology, which really was an amazing experience, helped me to learn about editing skills, how to approach papers, and then ultimately also how to put together a better publication for myself going forward. So that led to the creation of this paper that Dr. Shinkai and I put together.
So what was the genesis? Did you approach her and say, hey, I want to put out something to help folks that are interested in publishing their work as a sort of a framework, a guide to get them thinking about how to make a better paper? Or did she approach you and say, hey, why don't you think about writing something?
Yeah, so I think one of the best things about the fellowship is the mentorship opportunities that I had and getting to have that one-on-one experiences with Kanadi and mentorship from her. And it actually came from her. And she said, hey, why don't we put a paper together, the two of us, and sort of helping to create a framework for people as they're developing their careers on how to put together a great paper. Now that through the editorial process, I've gotten to see all spectra of papers and how we work on them to get them to the finished, wonderful product that gets published in our journals. So it was Kanadi who was able to come up with this great opportunity and then help me put together this manuscript.
Yeah, and so I think the manuscript came together very nicely and is very well structured. You mind discussing some features, some highlights from the editorial, some things that you may want someone in the audience to think about when trying to publish in a high impact academic journal? Like, where do you start? Is it before you do the experiment? Is it after you've done whatever study you've done and you're thinking about writing it? Like, when does that process kind of start?
Well, I think what's really nice about this paper is we really take it from the very beginning to the very end, but it doesn't mean that you need to start before you've even put together your design. Ideally, I think when you're wanting to publish somewhere great, you should be thinking about this really early in your design process, making sure that your research that you've put together makes sense, that you've identified any sort of flaws before you end up conducting the study. But even if you are deciding you want to publish after you've done your research and trying to figure out where to put it, it still helps you to put it together in a way that you're able to maximize your opportunities for publication. So I like the fact that it walks you through that process. You could really start anywhere during your process, but the best time would be before you've started the research itself to take a look at this and think about the different points that we highlight that you want to consider before you put together your manuscript.
One thing that folks don't really do their due diligence, particularly trainees early on, is doing a deep dive into the literature to figure out whether what they're asking has it been done before? What is the research landscape? And really nailing down what is your question and going from there. And in fact, I think that is probably one of the most difficult aspects of doing research. It's like actually doing something that's original and that hasn't been done before. There've been a lot of really smart people on this planet. It's hard to come up with an original idea.
Yeah, I think originality is a big part of it. And then the other part that sometimes maybe trainees would have a difficult time with is it relevant and will people care? Even if you came up with a new idea, if it's not going to impact medicine in the future, clinical practice, something we know about disease that's going to translate to a difference that we can make for patients, ultimately may not be something that you really want to pursue in depth. And that's where a key point that we talk about at the end of the editorial about mentorship, where that really comes in, making sure you have those mentors that can help guide you along the way and give you that feedback that maybe early in your training you're not able to accurately assess.
You mentioned in your piece that narrowing down that question, usually when you're writing a manuscript, that appears somewhere in their introduction, usually towards the end. It's kind of like, here is the gap, and this is what we're going to fill. What is your take also on cover letters? Do you think those sometimes serve to help put some of your work in context?
I definitely do. I think that that can be really helpful. Not every paper is going to come into the journal completely ready to go. But sometimes that cover letter can really give you the perspective of what it is they were trying to do. And you can approach the manuscript through a different lens and say, okay, I can really see how if this gets reformatted, if they take in some of the feedback from the reviewers, that they're going to be able to deliver a product worthy of the journal. And so that cover letter can really help give you that perspective on why this matters, why we should give some more attention to the paper.
Another aspect that I think trips people up in trying to get into a high impact journal is the method section. You guys spend a bit of time talking about this in the editorial. What are some things that you think trainees and authors in general should be thinking about when they're structuring a research paper and the method section?
I think one of the most important things is just making sure if you are reporting a certain study type that you have the appropriate frameworks and checklists done. If the methods weren't done appropriately, that's immediately going to be a reason to disregard a paper. So having that highlighted there, going through the process appropriately, having those checklists reported in your methods is going to really help so that the people reviewing it know that things have been done appropriately. The other part with methods, which I guess can be in both methods and results, but again, with images, I think that images is a really important factor in dermatology publishing in general, but making sure you have appropriate consents for any of your images, any of your human subjects data. That's going to be really important too, because if those aren't there, that's immediately going to throw that out the window.
By checklist, I believe you're talking about Prisma and strobe kind of reporting guidelines, which are really important in helping make your work more transparent. And they're also a great way to build your methods section so that it can really hit all the highlights that are needed for proper assessment of your research product.
Absolutely. And insufficiently reporting your methods is a key reason that manuscripts will get rejected. So, following those guidelines are really helpful in preventing your manuscript from an early termination, end of its fate.
Almost every article type, whether it's cohort studies or case control studies or randomized control trials, have some kind of reporting guidelines that can be really, really useful. And the other thing that I also find is in people consuming literature, often trainees, they don't spend a lot of time reading the methods. They like skip straight to the discussion to hear what the authors have to say about their findings. But in fact, You can learn probably the most about a study and whether to believe it or not from reading the methods and asking the question, is this the actual way to answer the question that this authors set out to answer? In the editorial process, if you know that that's such a linchpin, like the methods and reporting them accurately and selecting the appropriate statistical tests, et cetera, goes a long way, even if you have a null result, right, to get your paper considered at a high impact journal. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that maybe also puts in a plug for trainees: read the entire manuscripts. The more you read really well done studies, also, the more you're going to familiarize yourself with appropriate ways to do methods and help you put forth better articles in the future and better studies.
So, what would you say to a trainee and them trying to figure out where to put their journal article to perhaps get it seen by as many people as possible? You talk a little bit about that in your editorial.
Yeah, so we talk a little bit about how we consider journals, which can certainly be an overwhelming task. Where to submit, where does my research fit appropriately? We have both general medical journals that sometimes, if you have a really significant study, something that's going to be relevant to non dermatologists as well, large randomized control trials, maybe your study would be a good fit there. But also, we have our dermatology specific journals that, for the majority of what we're going to be publishing, are going to be the right fit. I think you really have to view it realistically and see what is the impact of our paper, of our results. Is this really groundbreaking, and determining how selective of a journal we should be submitting for? And again, I think that's a big part where mentors can be really helpful. For trainees who are early in their training, that's where the attendings that they're working with can really guide them and say, I think this is to the level of JAMA dermatology, or I don't, and consider submitting it elsewhere.
And you do a little writing about results in this editorial as well. What kind of things do you think trainees or potential authors need to think about when reporting results for dissemination in a high impact journal?
Yeah, again, I think giving really good clinical context. We want to ultimately know, why is this relevant? Why is this important? Why do we care about this? So relaying your results in a way that indicate that interest to the reader, what the clinical relevance is, how it impacts the disease, rather than just giving numbers there, putting it into context. It's 5 times more common in this population, as opposed to just reporting odds ratios or relative risk. The other thing that's really, really important that I think can lead to either early termination of a paper, its journey through the publication process, or need for a really significant revision, is if you try putting in causal claims when you're really not equipped to do so. So making sure that you're actually able to provide or back up the statements that you're giving. And it's pretty rare for studies to be able to attribute causality to something. So trying to make sure not to do that too heavily, I think, is really important.
And also making sure that you report along with your relative risks that you have also the reporting of some absolute risks because relative risks sometimes can be a bit misleading. And so appropriately putting your data in the context, like you said, I think is honest and transparent. And it provides more confidence for editors, reviewers, and readers that they're to believe your work and your results.
Absolutely. I mean, the same goes with statistical significance. A p less than zero point zero 0.05 doesn't always equal some great, interesting result. And you really have to look at those absolute differences sometimes between the groups to see if it's relevant.
And so that takes us to the discussion slash conclusion of papers. Where do some authors trip up in that aspect of their manuscript?
Certainly over interpreting their results, again, making causal claims, saying that the difference was more significant than it was. And the other was definitely just not accurately or sufficiently reporting limitations. We always need to identify what the limitations of our study are, come up with any potential other reasons for the results. Failure to do so really makes the paper less favorably reviewed, because you think that the authors maybe haven't considered any potential other confounders. So I think that that's a really, really important component of your discussion.
And what do you think about not properly putting your research in the context? I know sometimes authors, they might miss an entire body of work that was done adjacent to or within whatever paper they have written. And that can be a problem. What is your take?
I absolutely agree. And a lot of times that'll come up during the review process that reviewers will suggest, well, there's been a big omission of this paper. And I agree that that makes it seem less favorable, either that it wasn't looked up and we don't have that information, or if it was intentionally omitted from the discussion because it didn't support their findings. If there's another paper out there that was on a similar topic or maybe even gave discordant findings, it's important to address it and still bring it up in your discussion. You want all different perspectives and viewpoints offered.
Another question that comes up often, and you address a bit in the editorial, has to do with length of your findings. There's some papers that come in that are just so long-winded, and the finding is like one sentence. How do you figure out, do I submit a OI, i.e. an original investigation, or a brief report, or a research letter? How do I make that decision?
Yeah, I think that this is a really important topic to discuss. I don't know if it's as pervasive an issue elsewhere, but I know in my personal experience, a lot of trainees are reticent to submit research letters because they feel that it's a less valuable, a less important publication. But in fact, that's not true. The journal where you're publishing represents the merit of your work, the quality of the journal that you're going to be publishing to. And it may be that the results of your study yielded one, but really great nugget of information. That nugget should still be presented. It should still be published. People still need to have that information, but maybe it's not worth a full OI. One good way that you can try and see, can I work with a smaller or shorter format, or should I do a longer format, is by looking at how many figures or tables you have to put together to get all of the important data out of your study. If it's more than 3 or 4 of those, then probably you need a longer format. But really, if you can keep it in that concise format and with fewer figures and tables are able to relay all that information, then I think selecting a shorter format like a research letter is a great opportunity still to publish in a high impact journal.
Andrea, thank you so much for taking us through this really interesting and important editorial. I think we should close with you just telling us, something that you learned through this process, the last couple of years being an editorial fellow and just editing in general that you may want to impart on the audience.
Yeah, I think one great way to make yourself a better author, a better publisher, a better scientist is really through exploring it from the other side and being on that editing side of things, being able to review a lot of different papers, see what went right, see what went wrong. And this can be done either through opportunities getting involved in editorial work, also by being a reviewer and looking at different manuscripts, or also just being an avid reader and evaluating critically every article that you see, and including reading those methods sections. So I think the more you expose yourself to different articles and looking at it from a different lens, it's definitely going to make you a better writer, a better publisher. And I know that it has for me.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for being on the podcast. I am Dr. Adamson, and I've been speaking with Dr. Andrea Maderal about tips for getting your manuscripts into high-impact journals. You can find a link to the paper in this episode's description. This episode was produced by Daniel Musisi at the JAMA Network. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Catch you on the next episode of the JAMA Dermatology podcast.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.